Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. I'm out for a walk, but I'm gonna stay on the voice recorder, so there may be a little extraneous noise, people talking, my footfalls. I'm presently on my way to the ocean. And I don't have a plan for what I want to talk about today. So there's going to be some improvisation. And maybe, anti-ironically, that could become my plan. My plan to have no plan. I'm watching a cyphlid fly, otherwise known as a hoverfly, and it's dancing in the sunlight. And these flies, when they dance in the sunlight, they often just hover. And this one's now coming to check me out because its local environment has transformed. There's a gigantic living being, probably 1,000,000 times its mass. And if you think in terms of numbers of cells acting coherently as an organism, and histories and lineages of beings embodied in this little fly that I'm observing with care and wonder and awe. And we're observing each other. And of course, at its size, the overwhelmingly profound significance of a being of my size paying attention to it, and the overwhelming significance of a being of its size paying attention to me as it hovers in the music of my voice and the brilliant light of our incredible sun. Surely one of the most gentle and benevolent of stars. And as we're here together, me and this tiny insect, who appears for the moment to perhaps have departed. Oh, nope, it's back. We're having a reunion, right? A reunion of many beings, many lineages, many cell lines, many viral lines. And it's observing me quite closely. It's curious about me. And I'm curious about it, but in an entirely joyful way, an entirely compassionate way. For I recognize that our seeming separation is largely an illusion. And there are aspects of myself, probably very, very, very deeply and resistant to being encapsulated in language. Some of the aspects associated with dreaming or with love, with wonder, with awe, with humility, with reverence. Aspects of myself associated with qualities that to me seem deeply indicative of virtue. Together with this little creature that most people would either ignore or try to identify and then ignore. Oh, that's a this. On to the next thing. This is how we're trained by our cultures and peers and families to relate with living phenomena primarily. What is it? Right? A young person I know recently sent me a quote from a book that she was reading because she found it very confusing, this quote. And in the quote, there's a character speaking with a non-ordinary being, and the non-ordinary being is rather frightening, somewhat intimidating. It's not pretty. It's not a beautiful looking being. It's a fearsome looking being. And the fearsome looking being is bound by what we might call a geas. The word is spelled Geas. And a geas is often presented in stories as a crucial taboo or prohibition with which someone's non-ordinary power is bound, so that if the geas is broken, the non-ordinary powers may depart or even turn against the one in whom they are expressed. In any case, in the story, the character asks the non-ordinary being, beginning by saying its name and saying, you are one who cannot lie, implying that this being's way of being is deeply associated with truthfulness, but also is structured in such a way that either it is impossible for this being to lie, or it's somehow against its nature. Though the implication is the former one, that it's impossible. And the character asks, since you cannot lie, tell me, where is fairy? And in the quote, that word is spelled unusually, but it's clear what it means. At least, it's clear what direction this word is pointing in. And the being begins to answer in a very dissembled, verbal way, and says something like, well, I am not sure that anywhere I could point at would not be fairy. And it says this in a very complex and wordy way that's confusing. And the questioner becomes frustrated and says, that doesn't mean anything. I can't tell what you mean. And the being again repeats a complex verbal formula that's confusing and non-committal, in the sense of saying, I'm not sure where it isn't, and I'm not sure that if I told you where it is, that wouldn't be where it is not. And the questioner becomes frustrated, as did my young friend who sent me this message, and said, isn't this the most mind-bending thing you've ever heard? I dare you to make sense of it. And the sender knows my mind, and I know their mind. We've adventured in learning together a lot. And I wrote back and said, it's not that mind-bending. And although it sounds superficially confusing, I can suggest an answer that might help make sense of it. And the answer is this. Suppose that the being that must tell the truth realizes that wherever fairy might be, it isn't in language and concepts and words. It isn't a what. It doesn't have a where. And in fact, it's neither everywhere nor nowhere. It's neither here nor there. Perhaps this fairy they're speaking of is an aspect of our own origin. And so, while it's never missing, it can easily be hidden, and perhaps most easily by words and concepts and models and ideas. And so the non-ordinary being is using appropriate care so that it doesn't accidentally lie. And my young friend found that surprising and I think valuable. But something magical was happening there because we were both trying to understand. We were coming together and asking questions and wondering about the nature of being and perhaps the nature of magic, the nature of origin, the nature of the intelligences with which we are endowed and yet by which we are so easily consigned to a prison-like situation where wonder and fervor, creativity and joy, play and discovery are profoundly inhibited, if not entirely lost. Now, of course, my young friend in the conversation is in a much better situation than I am. Because being young, my friend isn't fully enlanguaged or enculturated, and being the child of a somewhat wild, and by which I mean feral, mother, she gets plenty of input from the aspects of our waking worlds that more closely resemble dreaming than they do thinking. And when, for a moment, the little fly and I were wondering about each other and making some kind of connection there, as it hovered in the music of my voice and the brilliant light of our sun, there's a place for the wild, for the magical, non-ordinary nature of our existence, to find expression, to find embodiment, to become embodied. It's not clear that it remains embodied as we part from one another, the little insect and I. And so it is that for many of us, and times matter, situations matter a lot, for many of us we will have a kind of irregular heartbeat of experience with our true nature, the nature that dwells unstained, undistorted, deep within all of us, however hidden it may be from our common waking world experiences. And for some of us, it's not very hidden. Some of us live lives of deep, profound wonder and learning and discovery and joy and trial and tribulation and injury and loss, too. But for some of us, much of our waking lives partakes of and embodies the invisible universe of beings, and birth and death, and dreaming and hope, and fear and love. For some of us, this is part of our everyday lives. But for vast populations of us, the dreaming dies as we get older and become used to the workaday world of dealing with the pragmatic necessities we think of them as, of shelter and food and paying the bills. Apparently, by becoming human, at least according to our societies, we incurred some kind of work debt. And rather than nourishing and nurturing our natural inclinations to be creative and fruitful and to learn skills and become accomplished and contribute meaningfully, which all of these things I think are, you can see them very naturally if you just watch children play, right? No one demanded that they play. They decide to play together. They grow and learn together. They have joy and wonder together. And it's good. I mean, where it's not. I mean, where it's good where it is. And it's troubling when it, turns dark. So there's a natural inclination in human beings, but this inclination has been captured by our supercultures and turned into a demand, and mostly a prison and a cage, though some of us are able to find meaningful work and roles, even in the very strangely disembodied and dissociated cultures in which we exist. Now, of course, some of us are not very connected with those cultures, and others of us are entirely bound up in them. So for some people, there's still, some reasonable degree of freedom. And for others, they just live in cages within cages within cages. I was talking to a friend last night who said something, very familiar to me. He said, I feel that I'm in a rut, within a rut, within a rut, within a rut. And I said, oh, that sounds like a ziggurat. It's like the opposite of a step-based pyramid that just goes downward into a giant abyss. And we both laughed. We didn't just laugh because of the canny pun there. Rather, we laughed because it was a laugh of recognition, of mutual recognition. Right? Only someone who truly understood what he meant could make such a joke. And in so doing, rather than dismissing our pain and confusion, we embraced it in a way that allowed us to be playful together. And also drew us closer together in bonding, because in that play, in that humor, even about something that's truly grim in both of our experiences, we acknowledged our deep friendship and long-standing adventure together. Even though we are profoundly different in our natures and our ways of being in the world, and in what we find important, and in what we are willing to believe or assert or concern ourselves with. Wildly different, me and this friend. Nonetheless, we've walked together in our lives for more than a decade. We know each other very well. In some ways, we know each other better than our families know us. There's a profound beauty there profound embodiment of companionship, of going together in the world and our lives. Through many years, many trials, some victories. And for a brief time, for me, I think a rather longer time for the insect, we too came together. Now, I can't know what was going on for the insect. Or rather, whatever was going on for the insect, I know only of that part in which I briefly partook when we became companions in a moment of this day in the sunlight on the living world, the beautiful and strange world we call our own. A world whose common name is synonymous with dirt. You know, dirt and soil are the same thing, but they don't have the same connotations. Over time, language acquires connotation. And so it's not so much that words mean things by themselves, because by themselves they're meaningless, but rather we employ them to mean certain kinds of things. And in an attempt to express understandings, histories, concerns and thoughts, speculations, theories and models, evaluations, metrics, and accounting. Now surely, if we just look at the words and we think only of their definitions, soil and dirt are pretty much the same thing. With dirt, there's the common connotation of something undesirable, something we'd like to make go away, and this partly comes from living inside boxes that we control the environments of. Whereas soil has other connotations, in fact, a vast array of them. And we can reconnotate the word just by using it. If I say, from the soil of my deepest being, a sprout unhindered rose to light. Right? Now we know that I'm not merely speaking about dirt. I am invoking or evoking qualities of dark nourishment, quiet, protective silence, soothing moisture, and perhaps even spiritual energies, mystery, wonder. And we recall with such ideas our own genesis in the great womb of the universe and the living wombs of our mothers. And in recalling this way, honor these things. So we can see how strange it is with language. And it's very easy to become confused and think that words mean things. All the time I see people asking questions. What does this word mean? What does this experience mean? How am I to decode this in my rational mind? And often this desire it has a peculiar foundation, which is the foundation of figuring out, quote unquote, what something is, does, or is for. But it's really important to understand that when we embark on that purpose, when we have this motive, there are a variety of dangers that come with it. And one of them is that wonder will die into a relic of some kind. We will transform our experience of the unknown with all of its potentials for discovery and creativity. We exchange this for a token. Oh, that's a syphilid fly. On to the next thing. There's an aspect of our habit and the habits we were taught by our cultures and our experience in them that's highly motivated to kill the mystery and produce a manipulable token. Now, the value of that token varies dramatically depending on who and what's involved. So, for example, Einstein, in his role as the emergence point of a vast field of interest and research and concern and speculation and thought and modeling and testing and mathematics, he gave us something so profound that it changed the meaning of everything. It's a very tiny spider in the path, but I don't want it to stay in the path because it's easily crushed. And something in me loves all the living beings, as if I sense that we are all together and their fates and well-being are profoundly intimate with my own. So I nudged the little spider along, though I'd have liked to have spent more time with it on the path where the people go. It's very busy and it's very dangerous for living things. You can see the network of roads and freeways, and we know about the cars and how they obliterate most of the living beings they come in contact with, just as a matter of convenience. And so it's very dangerous for living beings wherever there are roads. And one of the things that happens when we ask what something is or what it's for or what it does or what we do with it is that we're expanding roads that were previously made. And these roads can become something beautiful and alive, but for most common people, most of the time, the roads laid down. May I?
Yeah, sure.
Hi. Hi, beautiful.
I'm down.
My goodness. What a love. What a soul. Yes. Yes. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
You guys are beautiful.
All right, have a good day.
You too. How ironic that as I talk of the possible beauty of the roads, right? When someone brings their puppy and we meet and we get to exchange love. And it's real. It's unplanned. And no one can say what it is for, or even what it is. You see, it's like the fairy that the child is asking about. Where is it? Well, it's where we are open to notice it. It's where we accidentally become it. It's part of the spirit of improvisation, one of the topics that I'm orbiting now. The meeting with the people and their dog seems accidental in that I didn't plan it. But I had a role in it. For if I was not brave, and if they were not brave, and willing to come together, and willing to allow, a connection to arise and be nurtured and celebrated, then we'd have simply passed each other on the path. I noticed the dog's spirit, its spirit noticed mine, but it could easily have been bypassed. And when we're busy on the roads of our modernity, that's most of what goes on. Either we're bypassing, and so becoming ever more blind and unavailable to our own interiority and wonder and origin. Or we're making products. We're reducing things to models and images and photographs and recordings, tokens. And those tokens pile up and they have a deadly cost. They're like a form of embodied starvation. That keeps proceeding throughout our lives and becoming deeper and more dire. All of us know people who've crystallized into the structured roads of thought, commerce, finance, jobs, education, to such a degree that their inner spark seems to have died out. And as they get older, they just keep crystallizing in this way. And I recognize this because there's an aspect of my own story there. I'm not merely remarking upon distant others. So Einstein brought us something very strange. And unfortunately, many of the most powerful results of those discoveries were used in processes and purposes that are essentially evil, or at the very least nefarious. Because in the supercultures, war, technology, commodity, banking, these priorities reign over all others. And though our supercultures and our modernity give some lip service to our humanity, it's mostly empty. It would happily do away with that and convert everything, all living beings, to objects. It's not important here, the philosophical questions about whether objects are also beings or not. I make a fairly stark division between living beings, living places, and items, coins, words, models, language, theories, processes. It's obvious that the living beings and places give life to one another. They nourish one another deeply, all the time, without cessation. I think there is some aspect of the universe, some domain, in which all of the activity of the living beings creates something we might think of as very nourishing nectar for all the living beings, all the time. And if someone said, well, where is that place? I might answer like the strange creature in the story. We become the where of origin and magic and wonder and beauty and learning and curiosity and the possibility of the fulfillment of the promise of our human birth, our animalian birth, our organismal birth, our spiritual birth. We become that in the moments where we open and drop the costume of our humanity, or in some other cases, we transform the costume into a conduit for love, for mystery, for wonder, for the virtues. Just as when we see someone brilliantly dancing to no music whatsoever, in ways we'd never imagined possible, or we hear a child singing to themselves in a nearby yard, thinking no one's listening. But everything is always listening. Everything remembers the nourishing, comforting wonder of mutual recognition, mutual honoring, mutual opportunity, and mutual fulfillment. In one of my previous videos, I spoke a bit about evocation and invocation. And these ideas are profoundly woven into improv. Right? Into the unplanned, often playful, sometimes tragic, sometimes painful improvisations that our daily lives invite us toward, even if our circumstances leave us feeling bound or trapped. And many of us know all too well the pain of feeling bound and trapped in this way. By the time we are adults, most of us have developed habits that buffer the mystery and transform our curiosity and our playfulness into more saleable commodities, such as work. And as I said earlier, there's a natural inclination in nearly everyone to grow and develop and learn, acquire skills and abilities, discover and develop our faculties, the myriads of senses beyond the five that are our native human inheritance, not just from our human ancestors, but from all of our ancestors. And all of those gifts are embodied in each of us, but for most of us, we'll rarely understand the potential for their development, because we will remain in the traps and buffers and ruts that we took on, thinking, well, this is what everyone does, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what is expected of me, this is how I do it right. And in another of my videos, I talk at length about this idea of right and its relationship with boxes and rectangles, with traps, with cages, with pain. For when we are divorced from our creative intuition, from our fervent adoration, from our wonder, our reverence, our awe, our playfulness, we begin to experience something a lot like a living death, a kind of zombie existence, where the dead remains of what might have been our developmental paths have become a trap and a cage we can find no exit from. Partly because the faculties that seek those exits are usually among the first to be compromised. And in the same way that the child asking about where is fairy, we could ask, where is the compromise from? What is compromising us this way? And we might have the opposite kind of answer. Our language, ideas, thoughts, models, habits, and histories. But strangely, we transmit these traps to our children and to each other, and we reinforce them throughout our lives, apparently believing that this is necessary or virtuous, when in fact it is neither. Because the origins of meaning, the roots of meaningful experience and development, are occluded and counterfeited, somehow purposefully, by the strangely structured manifold of ideas and language that we inherit. What is the thing that drives the humans in this direction? Is it a being? Is it evil? Is it a kind of bad magic? Or is it instead the resonant absence of the origins of the virtues in our lives and experience. And how that absence deepens as we age, and how we become accustomed to that defection from each other, from life on earth, from intelligence, from humanity, from joy. I don't know the answer, though I have some models and theories. I don't know the answer. But one thing I am aware of is that our mode of mind in modernity is suffocating us. As if there's an aspect of our humanity, or rather our modern cognition, that resents the existence of mystery and wants dead, cold manipulables, the dissections common to science. I mean, there are two different ways to know a fish. One is to live and love and learn alongside the fish. The other is to dissect it and try to understand the mechanisms, the parts, the model. And once we have that model, then we think, an aspect of us is prone to think, oh, well, I know what a fish is. It's just these physical things I saw when I cut it open and killed it. But I think we both know that that's impossible. It's not possible for that to be true until we kill the fish with this intention, right? And that motivation to whatify, to name, to catalog, to record, to form and expand those dead roads of modernity that are unfriendly to our own nature and to all living beings, and to make more cars, to drive on those more roads. This process has been going on for thousands of years, millions of human lifetimes, and it's as if we're carrying a kind of curse. And we transmit it to our children, and they become fascinated, for they certainly want the attention of adults, opportunities for meaningful roles, which is part of why they cleave to magic and superheroes, because the invisible aspect of us recognizes its likeness there. So we are all vulnerable, because without deep, rich community and deeply rich family connections and relationships, most of us will suffer. We will shrivel, we'll dry up inside, in the soil of our interiority. And this is an unnecessary and terrible tragedy. And yet, it's everywhere around and within nearly all of us. We struggle with it throughout our lives, often in isolation or confusion. It hurts. It hurts to be deprived of the nourishing intimacies and joyful play that we can see easily apparent in the behavior of any puppy or kitten or human infant. And there's a myth that we grow out of it. No, I think it's quite the opposite. It's invaded. It's colonized, to use a hot watchword these days. It becomes colonized by the traditions and habits of the cultures of thinking and language, and what I'll call formal representational cognition, which I often frame as the primary problem for human beings. We have these assets. They are assets, and they're different from even similar assets that animals may have. And animals have similar assets. They're just not quite as formal as ours. But there are traps in this mode, and they are profound, and largely invisible, because once we've been encompassed by them, very few of us will make the journey required to see back toward them from outside. And thus to be able to see, this naming thing is dangerous. It's not only dangerous, but it has specific dangers that if we ignore them, they are likely to overcome our interiority, to establish themselves in its place like grand churches, standing where once living beings embodied their intimacies and origins. Last night in the garden, I saw at sunset, and the sunrise and the sunset are incredibly important times because they are the twilight times of between, where there's a window of opportunity. Our interiority is called forth from the possible mausoleum of our modernity, and there's an opening there, a doorway there. There are other doorways too, but every day the sun rises and the sun sets. And I was in the garden at the sunset, and I'd been present with some of the animals and plants there. And earlier in the day, yesterday, in the morning, as I awakened, I heard in my spirit a cry, a very high-pitched cry, like the cry of a small child, or perhaps an animal that was in agony. I heard this cry, this single sound, and I reflected on the pain of the living beings and of individual people and myself and beings I have known. And I didn't, it was mysterious. I didn't understand what this was for or about, right? And there you can see immediately something happens. The grasping hand of representational consciousness awakens, right? And it wants to reduce it to something knowable, sayable, modelable, dismissible. But that didn't happen, really. I kept the memory alive, and I didn't know what it was. And I didn't try to know what it was, but I did try to feel what it was for or about. And when I was in the garden at sunset, I was about to leave, but I decided to make one more circuit. So I went back, and on a bench near a table there was a squirrel man. And he was standing on his haunches with his back bent in the middle, and his hands were in a prayer-like position, or what we might think of as his hands, or her hands. All the hands, their hands. And he was emitting a cry. And I've heard the squirrels make this cry in the evening. And it's a very profound sound. It's very powerful. In this little sound, there's more power than all the machines of mankind. And it was a little bit like, it's very hard for me to emulate it, but it was a little like this. And I remained quietly with the squirrel for some time, and I could see that the squirrel was transforming inside. And what I mean is very complex, and a lot of it is mysterious, but a small part of what I mean is it was transforming. It was embodying millions of generations of squirrels in the setting sun, singing the song of the squirrel people. Now, these are just words, and they're imperfect and incomplete. But I was grateful to participate and be reminded, and when I heard its call, I recognized the likeness with the sound I had heard in the morning, even though the sound I had heard in the morning surely had something to do with pain, wounding, tragedy, loss, aloneness, isolation, loneliness, injury, illness. And I recognized the resonance between these two sounds without needing to collapse them into the same thing, which is what my thinking mind would have liked to have done, because, well, it wants something it can, formulate, frame, and then dismiss. And you notice how, it's easy to notice how the frames of things are there to cut off, right? They are there to give us a smaller, completed view, seemingly completed view, enclosed by the box, the edges. And this is a primary feature of our formal representational cognition as we ordinarily employ it, but it is not, those faculties are in no way limited to that function, but that function has somehow become the low-hanging fruit toward which we too easily reach all throughout our waking time. And sometimes even in dreaming, although thankfully in dreaming we are relieved of the hard and fast frameworks of meaning, identity, and relation that we're used to in our waking experience. And sometimes while awake, the dreaming mind, seeps in, and things and beings, relationship situations begin to sparkle with a magical fluorescence, the fluorescence of memory, of origin, of love. Perhaps by becoming aware of the crippling explicitness of our structured ideas and models and words and theories, we can learn how to gently transfer the precedence from the aspect that makes dead models to the aspect that nourishes living relationships. And I say this is accessible for us. But most of us need help. We need wise and intelligent others, and we need people whose knowledge is not merely formal, whose knowledge is deep and relational and non-ordinary. The knowledge we are more inclined to think of as wisdom. But again, these words are thin compared to what they point at. I've come now from my home to the ocean. And I cannot take this recording to the ocean because the noise of the living waters will obliterate my voice. So I'm wandering in a little place nearby the ocean where there's a big windmill, a big old windmill. And it might also once have been a turret. I want to honor the spirit of improvisation, of play, of accident, and the joyful exuberance that we feel when reunited with astonishing living beings in nature, with people with whom we're fascinated, who we love, or are enchanted by. And also with the private improvisations of our own lives. To plan may be partly human, but to improvise with beauty in our hearts is surely divine. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.